Kyoto, where time stands still. They say if Tokyo shows you the future, Kyoto holds the past. And I came to Kyoto, not for the busy streets, but for something else, something quieter, something older than memory. I stepped off the train with no expectations, only a hunger to feel something real. The air smelled like wood smoke and cherry blossoms. The streets were narrow, quiet, lined with machiya, traditional wooden townhouses. Everything moved slower here. And then she appeared, a geisha, or maybe a maiko. Her face painted white, her steps small, floating like a whispered dream across cobblestones. She didn't speak, didn't look. She simply moved like Kyoto itself, graceful, untouchable, lost in time. I followed her with my eyes until she disappeared into an alley that no Google map could find. That's how Kyoto felt, like chasing the ghost of Japan's soul. They led me to Fushimi Inari, where vermilion gates stretch endlessly into a sacred mountain. I walked through them in silence. One gate, then another, then another. Each step was a prayer, each breeze a whisper from Shinto spirits that lived in the woods. Locals passed me, some barefoot, some with offerings, some with tears. And then halfway up the path, I stopped. A fox statue stared at me, not stone, not alive, but something in between. That's the thing about Kyoto. You begin to believe in things you used to laugh at. At dusk, I wandered through Gion. The lanterns had started glowing, and the past came back. I ducked into a tea house, tatami mats, a kettle hissing. An old man poured matcha without a word. His hands moved like a calligrapher's brush, precise, spiritual. We didn't speak the same language, but when he handed me the bowl of tea, I understood. This was not a drink. It was a ritual, a moment of shared stillness between two strangers from different worlds. The next morning, I climbed to Kiyomizu-dera. Mist clung to the valley below, the wooden temple perched above the trees like a watchtower of heaven. I leaned over the balcony. A monk rang a bell in the distance, and suddenly, I felt small, but not in a sad way, in a freeing way. Kyoto didn't ask you to do anything. It just asked you to be still. They told me the bamboo forest was just trees. They lied. Walking into Arashiyama is like entering a dream with no language. Tall green stalks rise on both sides. Wind slips through them like a song you knew as a child but forgot. I paused in the middle, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I heard nothing but peace. Before leaving Kyoto, I walked the philosopher's path. Cherry blossoms danced on the water beside me. Stone bridges, tiny temples, a cat sleeping on a wall. I wasn't thinking. I was just feeling. That's when I realized Kyoto isn't a place. It's a state of mind. I came to Kyoto chasing stories, but I left with silence. The good kind. The kind that doesn't beg to be filled. The kind that stays with you long after you've left. Mount Fuji, the silent guardian. Some mountains roar. Mount Fuji listens. From the moment I saw her, yes, her, rising beyond the clouds like a sleeping goddess, I understood why the Japanese call her Fuji-san with reverence. She wasn't just a mountain, she was a mirror. And I had come not just to see her, but to climb her. Distant view of Mount Fuji from Lake Kawaguchi. Early morning mist. I woke before dawn at Lake Kawaguchi. The lake was still, untouched, like a bowl of polished glass. And there she was. Perfect, distant, unmoving. Mount Fuji stood like a keeper of secrets, wrapped in mist, blushing under the touch of morning light. It was the kind of silence that makes your chest tighten, not from fear, from awe. Locals were fishing nearby. They didn't look at the mountain the way I did. They were used to her presence, but I wasn't. To me, she was the reason I crossed oceans. Later that day, I reached the 5th station, the halfway point, where most pilgrims begin the journey up Fuji's slopes. The air was thinner, the winds colder, the trees started to disappear, and so did comfort. I joined a quiet group of climbers, some young, some old. No one said much. We all knew. It wasn't about the mountain, it was about ourselves. The trail turned into gravel, loose volcanic rock. Wind slapped our cheeks. With each step, Fuji asked, "Why are you here?" And with each breath, I had to answer. I thought of quitting a dozen times. My legs ached, my lungs rebelled. But something strange happened as the sun dipped low. The struggle turned into prayer. Not the kind you speak, the kind you feel. Every footstep was a surrender, every gasp of air, a meditation. And then, sunset. The sky turned molten gold, bleeding into hues of fire and lavender. I turned around, and for the first time I looked down on the clouds. There are a few moments in life that make you forget your name. This was one of them. We weren't just climbing, we were ascending into the sacred. We stayed the night at a tiny hut, nestled somewhere above 8,000 feet, packed like sardines in sleeping bags. No lights, no talk, just the howling of wind and the crunch of boots in the distance. At 2 a.m., a guide nudged me awake. It was time. Summit climbs begin in darkness, so you can catch the sunrise from the top. They call it Goreku, the moment the sun rises from the edge of the earth, spilling its first light over Japan. It was black, so black that the only light came from our headlamps and the stars above. Millions of them, sharp and silent. The trail steepened. The wind turned fierce. I saw someone ahead stumble, another one vomit, but no one stopped. Not here, not now. Fuji doesn't want your strength. She wants your surrender. And just when I thought I'd break, the sky began to shift. First, a sliver of orange cracked the horizon. Then came the light. Mountains below us looked like waves frozen in stone. The wind carried prayers, actual ones, written on wooden sticks and tied to shrines at the summit. And in that moment, I cried. Not for the pain, but because it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The kind of beauty that doesn't just touch your eyes, it breaks into your soul and lives there. At the summit, I stood at the edge of Fuji's crater, a circle of jagged silence. I remembered something I'd read before coming. He who climbs Mount Fuji once is wise. He who climbs it twice is a fool. I laughed quietly, not because I agreed, but because I understood. Climbing down was harder than I thought. My legs were jelly, my feet numb. But I was lighter, not in body, in spirit. I had left something up there, or maybe I'd found something. Mount Fuji didn't change me in an obvious way. She didn't give me answers, but she showed me how small I was, and how sacred that smallness could be. We live life racing up, but sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is stand still, breathe deep, and look back down. Tokyo hit me like a fever dream. I arrived by bullet train just after dark. The city didn't sleep, no, it pulsed, like it had a heartbeat of its own. Neon signs flashed like lightning, casting pinks and blues across polished glass and wet asphalt. The crowd didn't walk, they flowed, a river of silent urgency. No pushing, no shouting, just rhythm. Shibuya Crossing was my baptism. I stood there in the middle of the world's busiest intersection, heart pounding, not from fear, but from electricity. Hundreds moved around me like choreography, every face locked on a destination. But somehow, no one bumped me. I was invisible, and yet completely alive. I found a ramen shop tucked beneath a train track, only 8 seats, steam fogging up the glass, the cook wearing a white bandana and not saying a word. I slurped broth so rich it could have been brewed from the soul of Tokyo itself. In that tiny bowl was warmth, silence, comfort. The chaos outside faded. I didn't need translation to know I was safe here. The next morning, I slipped into the underbelly of the city, the subway. Ordered, quiet, precise, like the veins of a giant machine that never stops. A sea of suits, eyes low, earbuds in. Everyone in sync, yet everyone alone. It wasn't coldness, it was privacy. A city of millions where people gave each other invisible space. I surfaced at Asakusa and walked straight into the past. Sensoji Temple towered above me, its crimson gates and giant lanterns swaying gently in the breeze. Smoke curled from incense pots, rising like prayers into the sky. I saw a woman in kimono draw an omikuji, her fortune, then laugh when it turned out bad. She tied it to a rack and smiled. Even misfortune had grace here. But Tokyo isn't just shrines and subways. I found myself in Akihabara, surrounded by LED madness and anime billboards that stretched into the clouds. In one building, a man in a full Pikachu suit handed me a flyer for a maid cafe. In another, I watched teenagers in VR helmets swinging swords at invisible monsters. The city was a contradiction, sacred and absurd, elegant and insane. And then came the rooftops. There's a place, most people don't know it, where you can see the whole skyline without noise. I climbed. Nara felt like a whisper after Tokyo's roar. I stepped off the train into soft sunlight and a slower rhythm. The city was smaller, quieter, like Japan had taken a deep breath and decided to rest here. No neon signs, no towering glass buildings, just open sky, earthy roads, and the scent of ancient wood and autumn leaves. I walked toward Nara Park, unsure what to expect. Then I saw them. Everywhere. Deer. Real ones. Hundreds. They weren't scared of people. In fact, they walked among us like we were guests in their home. Calm, regal, polite in a way that didn't make sense until you remembered. This is Japan. Even the deer bow. And they did. I bought special crackers from a vendor, and the moment I held them up, a small group approached me. Not rushed, not aggressive. They stopped a foot away, lowered their heads in a slow, deliberate bow. I bowed back, laughing, and fed them. It wasn't a trick, it was reverence. A cultural rhythm so deep, it extended to animals. I kept walking until the sounds of tourists faded and I found myself beneath towering trees. The path narrowed into a mossy trail. On either side were stone lanterns, hundreds of them, covered in green velvet from years of rain and silence. I'd entered Kasuga Taisha, the shrine of light and shadow. A priest passed me, robes flowing, his footsteps making no sound. Nearby, a young girl rang a bell, clapped twice, and bowed. She didn't look up. She didn't smile. She just prayed, like the gods were right there beside her. And maybe they were. Further in, I saw a deer resting beside a Buddha statue, both wrapped in the same stillness. I stood there for a long time, not speaking, not moving, just listening to the wind through leaves, the breath of something ancient. I didn't want to break it. Later I found the great Buddha. Todaiji Temple loomed in the distance like something out of myth. Its wooden gate, so massive, it dwarfed everyone who passed through. And then the statue itself, 15 meters of bronze serenity, eyes half closed in eternal awareness. I stood in front of it, barefoot on cool stone. People whispered, some cried, some took photos. But me, I just stared. Not at the statue, into it. The face didn't judge, didn't smile, it just was, pure presence. And in that stillness, I felt something inside me soften. I think we spend most of our lives tightening, our hearts, our minds, our fears. But here, in front of this silent giant, surrounded by 1,000 years of prayer and the gentle watch of sacred deer, I felt a loosening, like I didn't need to be anyone, prove anything, fix everything. I just needed to be. That night, I stayed in a ryokan on the edge of town, a traditional inn with paper walls and futons and the smell of tatami that clung to your memory long after you left. I soaked in a hot bath as the moonlight spilled through the bamboo blinds. Outside, I could hear the distant rustle of leaves and the soft clicking of deer hooves on gravel. And then, silence. Not the empty kind, the full kind, the kind that holds you. I realized Nara hadn't shown me anything loud or flashy. It hadn't tried to impress. It had done something braver. It had invited me to slow down, to breathe deeper, to feel more. I fell asleep that night without dreams, not because my mind was empty, but because, for once, it was at peace. When I woke at dawn, I stepped outside to see mist curling over the hills. A lone deer stood in the clearing, watching me. It bowed once gently, then turned and vanished into the trees. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. Some places don't want to be chased. They just want to be remembered. And Nara will never leave me. Okinawa was a different Japan. The air was thicker, warmer. The wind carried salt and song, not the rigid rhythm of the cities I'd left behind. The sky stretched wide, and the sea, God, the sea, wasn't just blue. It was every shade of memory. I landed in Naha, the capital, but I didn't stay long. Cities weren't what I came for. I was chasing something older, something softer. I rented a small scooter and drove north, along winding coastal roads that felt like they were drawn by the hands of poets. The ocean on my left, green hills on my right, and not a single sound, but wind and waves. The first thing you notice about Okinawa is time. It doesn't move here. It rests. Old men played shamisen under banyan trees, their fingers slow, voices lower than the sea. Children ran barefoot through the streets, chasing each other with paper fans and laughter. Shops didn't open at any exact time. No one was rushing. No one needed to be somewhere else. In the village of Ojimi, I met her, Oba-san, a 94-year-old woman with skin like folded parchment and eyes that still laughed. She invited me to sit while she cut vegetables for lunch. No ceremony, no overthinking, just kindness in its purest form. We didn't speak the same language, but that didn't matter. She showed me photos, faded ones. Her husband now gone, her children now far, her garden still growing. She pointed at me, then at herself. Then she smiled. Nan kuru naisa. I later learned what it meant. Everything will be all right, in its own time. It wasn't a phrase. It was a way of living. Okinawans are the longest living people on Earth. And it's not just their food or their genes. It's their rhythm, their spirit. They carry joy the way others carry burdens, lightly, casually, with grace. Oba-san fed me goya champuru, bitter melon stir-fried with egg and tofu. It was unlike anything I'd tasted. Earthy, sharp, unforgettable, like the island itself. She laughed when I grimaced at the bitterness. Then she poured awamori, the local liquor, and we drank under a slow-sinking sun. Later that evening, I walked along the shore near Cape Manzamo. The cliffs here rose like giants beside the sea, ancient and unmoved. Below, the water crashed in perfect rhythm, like Okinawa's heartbeat echoing against stone. There's a legend that says the island was kissed by the gods and spared from their wrath. Maybe that's why it feels so gentle. But don't mistake gentle for weak. Okinawa has bled. During World War II, it was torn apart. Its beaches turned to battlegrounds. Its people caught in a storm not of their making. There are caves here where women and children once hid, silent in the dark, praying for the sound of peace. Some never left. I visited one of those caves. No guides, no signs, just a small shrine, a candle, and silence. The air inside was heavy, not with ghosts, but with memory, a kind of silence that demanded you bow, not your head, but your heart. Outside, the waves kept crashing. Okinawa had healed, but it hadn't forgotten. And maybe that's the secret. To live long. You don't run from pain. You carry it gently, like a shell pressed to your ear, always listening, always learning. On my last night, I joined a small festival in a village square. Lanterns glowed like floating stars. Drums thundered. Women danced in circles, clapping, spinning, singing in a language older than the flag above them. They pulled me in. No questions. No need for permission. I danced. I laughed. I let go. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about tomorrow. I wasn't holding on to yesterday. I was simply here, now alive. When I left the island, Oba-san pressed a paper into my hand, a simple brushstroke drawing of a flower. Below it, one word, Ikigai. It means your reason for being, your why. I don't know what mine is yet, but I know I felt closer to it in Okinawa. Because sometimes you don't find your purpose by chasing it. Sometimes you find it by slowing down and letting it find you. Hakone greeted me like a secret, not loud, not eager, just there, waiting, quiet, cloaked in mist and pine. The train ride from Tokyo had been short, but the shift was dramatic. 1 minute I was in the buzz of the modern world, and the next I was surrounded by mountains that looked like they had held their breath for centuries. The first thing I noticed was the scent. Earth, sulfur, moss, something old and healing. Hakone is famous for its hot springs, and you don't just visit them. You feel them in your lungs, in your skin, in the way your shoulders begin to loosen without you realizing. I stayed in a ryokan built generations ago, the kind with wooden beams that creak with wisdom and windows that frame nature like paintings. My room overlooked a hillside dripping with fog. Silence poured in like water. Even time seemed to move more gently here. That evening, I slipped into the onsen. There are few things in life as pure as hot spring water meeting cold mountain air. The pool was outside, surrounded by stone and bamboo. The steam rose around me, thick and soft, and the stars were barely visible through it. I closed my eyes, and for a while, I didn't exist. No noise, no name, just warmth. There's something spiritual about it, not religious, not even mystical, just real, like your body remembers something your brain forgot. That peace is possible. That stillness can be a home. The next day, I took a boat across Lake Ashi. The water was black glass. Mountains towered on every side, and the trees wore mist like armor. In the distance, a red torii gate rose from the shoreline, half in the lake, half in the sky. They say the lake is protected by a dragon spirit. And looking at it, I believe them. The boat was silent, the wind cold. I stood at the bow and watched the clouds move over Mount Fuji's silhouette in the distance, her peak just barely visible, like a dream half remembered. Then came the cable car, up into Owakudani, the great boiling valley. The air changed again, thicker, sharper. Sulfur filled my nose. Steam hissed from cracks in the earth like warnings. Yellow-stained rocks lined the paths, and signs told us to be careful, to limit time spent here. But I didn't feel fear. I felt awe. The earth here wasn't quiet. It groaned. It breathed. It reminded us that beneath all our buildings and stories and plans, something deeper lives, something older, something we don't control. I ate a black egg, boiled in the volcanic waters. They say each one adds 7 years to your life. I don't know if that's true, but I smiled anyway, thinking how many people had stood here, egg in hand, marveling at the planet beneath their feet. As I hiked back down, I took the forest trail instead of the main road. The path was narrow, damp, and lined with ancient cedars that reached high enough to block the sky. Birds called softly. Leaves dripped with the rain from earlier that morning. There were stone markers along the trail, old ones, covered in moss, their inscriptions half erased by time. Jizo statues, guardians of travelers. I stopped and placed a small pebble at one's feet. Not because I had to, because it felt right. That's what Hakone does. It doesn't speak loudly, it doesn't flash or perform, it just is. And if you slow down enough, you hear it. Later that night, back at the ryokan, I sat in the garden wrapped in a thin robe, sipping green tea as crickets sang their endless lullaby. A soft rain began to fall, not harsh, not cold, just enough to remind me I was alive. I thought of the samurai who once passed through this region, men of silence, of ritual, of code. I wondered how many of them had walked these same paths, bathed in these same waters, prayed at these same shrines. I wondered if they had also paused, like me, and whispered thank you to no one in particular. Before I slept, I wrote one word in my journal: stillness. Not as a goal, as a gift, because Hakone didn't change me with a flash or a fire. It changed me the way water shapes stone, softly, patiently, deeply. And when I left the next morning, stepping onto the train as the mist pulled back into the hills, I felt like I was taking something with me, something warm, something silent, something sacred. Hiroshima does not begin with what you see. It begins with what you feel. I arrived on a gray morning. The clouds hung low, as if they too were remembering. The city moved like any other. Cars humming, students biking to school, shopkeepers sweeping their steps. But beneath that everyday rhythm, there was a silence. A respectful silence. A silence that does not ask to be broken. I walked toward the Peace Memorial Park. Trees lined the avenue, green and full of life. Children's laughter echoed from across the river. For a moment, it felt like any ordinary place. And then, I saw it, the dome. What was once the Hiroshima Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall now stood as a twisted skeleton of stone and steel, untouched since August 6, 1945. They left it that way on purpose. To remember. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The wind moved through the broken structure, not howling, not whispering, just carrying. Carrying memory, carrying sorrow. There were no explosions, no screams, no fire when I stood there. Only the cold knowing that all of it had happened, that people had stood in the same place as me, and in a single breath, the sky fell on them. And yet, here I was, standing. The museum was quiet. People moved slowly. Some cried. Some took notes. Some just stared into the faces frozen in black and white photographs. Ordinary people, doing ordinary things. Moments before everything changed. A schoolgirl's lunchbox, charred but intact. A wristwatch stopped at exactly 8:15 a.m. Letters never sent. I moved through the exhibits like a ghost, reading names, listening to testimonies, trying, failing, to imagine what it was like. But then I saw something I wasn't expecting. A wall covered in origami cranes. Thousands of them. Bright, colorful, made by children from all over the world. They fluttered slightly in the air-conditioned breeze, like tiny wings refusing to stay still. They were folded in memory of Sadako Sasaki, a young girl who died from radiation a decade after the bombing. She believed that that folding 1,000 paper cranes would grant her a wish to live. She folded over 1,300 before she passed. Now, children from every continent carry her story. They fold cranes not to erase the past, but to carry it forward, to say, we remember. We hope. That day, I didn't just remember history. I witnessed humanity, and I wasn't done. I walked across the bridge toward the Children's Peace Monument. Bells hung from the structure, and anyone could ring them. I rang one. Softly, it chimed like a prayer, rising into the cloudy sky. I didn't say anything aloud. I just stood there and let the moment wrap around me. Later, I walked through the Peace Memorial Park again, but this time slower. I noticed how many trees there were, how green everything had become. Nature had returned. Flowers bloomed where ashes once fell. Birds nested in branches grown from scorched soil. Hiroshima had rebuilt itself, not in defiance, but in dignity. I wandered into a small garden near the river and sat beside an old man feeding pigeons. He looked at me, smiled, then handed me a piece of bread. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We just watched the birds gather and scatter, and I thought, this is peace. Not the absence of noise, not the forgetfulness of pain, but the choice to live anyway, to love anyway, to build anyway. That evening, I visited Shirakawa-go Garden, built centuries before the war, destroyed in the bombing, and lovingly restored. It looked like a painting. Bridges arched over koi ponds, willows wept gently over the water, stones lined paths that wound like whispered poems. The sun was setting. The garden glowed gold. I saw a young couple sitting on a bench, laughing quietly. Nearby, an old woman in a kimono walked slowly, holding her grandson's hand. Time moved here like a lullaby, not rushed, not heavy, just present. Hiroshima didn't beg for pity. It offered perspective. It didn't ask you to cry. It invited you to understand. It taught me that memory is not about holding on to pain. It's about holding on to truth. As I walked back to my hotel that night, the city lights shimmered on the river's surface. Bicycles clicked by. Soft jazz spilled from a bar window. A cat crossed the road, slow and certain. Life had returned, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. And in my chest, something shifted, not broken, rearranged. I left Hiroshima not in tears, but in quiet gratitude, because it reminded me that the human spirit is not just strong, it is relentless. It is capable of turning the darkest fire into the softest light. We've seen Japan's wounds. Now, let's move north into white silence and winter's soul. The land of snow and survival awaits. Shall we journey next into Sapporo, where frost becomes beauty and cold becomes poetry? Let's keep going. Sapporo was winter. Pure, unapologetic winter. Not just snow on rooftops. Not the kind of cold you meet on a breezy day. This was something deeper, ancient, a season that blanketed the soul as much as it did the earth. I arrived just before the first snowstorm of the season. The sky was a heavy gray, like an old coat buttoned tight around the shoulders of the world. And then it began, soft, slow flakes descending from a sky that said nothing, but meant everything. By the time I reached the city center, the streets were already turning white. People didn't panic. They moved through the snowfall like they were born into it, calm, ready, at home. I watched a child laugh as he tried to catch a flake on his tongue. I watched an old man walk through the snow without an umbrella, face tilted up, letting it fall freely. Sapporo wasn't fighting the cold. It was embracing it. I stayed in a small guest house near Odori Park. From my window, I could see trees wrapped in lights, glowing faintly beneath a curtain of falling snow. It didn't feel like a city. It felt like a memory someone forgot to write down, and I had accidentally wandered into it. The Sapporo Snow Festival hadn't started yet, but already the preparations were underway. Massive blocks of ice lined the street, waiting to be carved into dragons and temples and towers. I spoke to a sculptor, his breath visible with each word, and he said, "Snow is like time. You shape it, it melts, and still, it was worth it." That night, I found a ramen shop lit by a single red lantern. The wind outside howled, but inside was heaven. The bowl arrived steaming, miso broth thick and creamy, noodles just firm enough, butter melting slowly on top. I took one bite and understood everything I needed to know about surviving winter in Hokkaido. You don't outlast it. You warm your way through it. The next morning, I took a train to the countryside, deeper into the folds of snow-covered hills. Trees stood like frozen statues. Roads disappeared under soft blankets of white. And then I arrived at Yosenke Onsen. It was quiet. So quiet that even the birds didn't dare break the silence. I slipped into the outdoor hot spring as the snow fell softly on my shoulders. The contrast was unreal. My body submerged in fire-warm water, my face kissed by ice. Steam curled around me, wrapping me in a fog that blurred the world into a single, perfect moment. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't think. Not about where I was going, not about what I was chasing, just here. That's what Sapporo gave me. Not excitement, not wonder. Stillness, a pause in the middle of motion. Later that day, I visited the historical village of Hokkaido. Wooden buildings stood preserved in snow, like scenes frozen in time. There were old post offices, samurai homes, weather-beaten schools. No one else was there. Just me, walking through silence that had texture. I entered one building and sat alone on a tatami mat. The walls creaked slightly, snow tapped at the windows, and I could swear, if I sat still enough, I could hear the voices of those who once lived here. Not ghosts, memories. Sapporo didn't haunt, it honored. As evening came, I returned to the city and wandered through Susukino, where nightlife bloomed even in the cold. People ducked into izakayas, their laughter spilling out as warm clouds. I joined them, ordered grilled fish, sake hot enough to fight the chill, and listened to stories I didn't fully understand. But it didn't matter. Sometimes warmth doesn't need translation. I walked back through the snow just as the first festival lights flickered to life. They glowed in blues and whites, casting soft shadows on the falling snow. The city sparkled. Not loudly, not with pride, but with presence. I paused on the bridge that crossed the Toyohira River. Below, the ice creaked softly, water moving in whispers beneath. And I realized, Sapporo wasn't just a place to see. It was a place to feel cold and grateful for it, to feel alone and perfectly okay with it, to feel small and peaceful in that smallness. Not every journey teaches with fire. Some teach with frost. And in that frost, I found something unexpected. Not just beauty, but acceptance. Because snow, like time, covers everything. And in covering, it softens. It forgives. It starts over. I left Sapporo the next day, watching snow blur the train window as the city faded behind me. But something in me stayed behind. Or maybe I just carried a piece of its stillness with me. Osaka didn't wait for me to arrive. It met me halfway, with a shout, a sizzle, and a grin so wide it split the sky. I had barely stepped off the train when the city pulled me in like a hungry friend. Gone was the meditative hush of Sapporo. Here the air crackled, not just with sound, but with soul. Osaka wasn't asking you to observe. It dared you to join the madness. I dropped my bag and headed straight for Dotonbori. It was like walking into a neon fever dream. Giant crab signs waved mechanical claws at passers-by. A dragon curled above a ramen shop, smoke puffing from its nostrils. Lights blinked in every color. Music blasted from storefronts. The Glico Running Man loomed overhead like a god of chaotic joy. And beneath all that light, people. Laughing, shouting, eating. Always eating. I joined the queue for takoyaki, those golden octopus-stuffed orbs that hissed and steamed in their cast-iron molds. I watched the vendor, an artist in a bandana, flip them with sticks, his hands a blur. When my order came, I bit too soon, burned my tongue, and laughed with the stranger next to me. She nodded and said, "First time?" I nodded back, mouth full, eyes watering, heart already home. This was Osaka. Not polished, not poised, but alive. I wandered through Kuromon Ichiba Market next, a narrow stretch of stalls that smelled like soy and sea and flame. I ate grilled scallops with butter, Wagyu beef skewers that melted on the tongue, and fresh tuna so rich it felt like velvet. No menus. No English, no guide, just point, pay, smile. The universal language of damn, that's good. As the sky darkened, I crossed the river into Namba, where the streets buzzed with energy that didn't dim with nightfall, it doubled. Pachinko parlors blazed with color. Izakayas spilled warmth onto the sidewalks. A guy in a Pikachu costume was dancing with a bottle of sake. I ducked into a tiny bar no bigger than a kitchen. Inside, 8 seats, 1 bartender, Miles Davis playing low. The man behind the counter asked me where I was from. I told him. He poured whiskey without breaking eye contact and said, "Welcome to the real Japan." We didn't speak much after that. We just drank. Sometimes that's enough. The next morning, I went looking for the old heart of the city. Shitenoji Temple was quiet, still wearing the scent of incense and rain. Founded over 1400 years ago, it stood proud. Not grand like Kyoto's temples, but steady. Worn yet present. There I saw a woman kneeling in prayer, her grocery bags beside her, life and devotion side by side. I wandered to Osaka Castle next, its white walls rising from the trees like something from a storybook. Surrounded by moats, cherry trees, and joggers in modern sneakers, it felt suspended in time. On the top floor, I looked out over the city. A wild mix of glass towers, rusty rooftops, and green bursts of parkland. Osaka didn't match. It didn't try to. It thrived in its messiness. Later that day, I found myself at a street corner in Shinsekai, standing beneath the looming Tsutenkaku Tower. The area felt like an echo of a Japan that once dreamed of the future, now slightly faded, slightly offbeat, but completely authentic. A retro wonderland of deep-fried skewers and shopkeepers who still smoked indoors. I ordered kushikatsu, skewered everything, dipped in oil and fried to gold. The rule was simple: 1 dip per skewer. Break it, and you'd hear about it. I didn't. I dipped. I ate. I dipped again, on accident, and got scolded like a child. And I laughed so hard I nearly choked. Osaka didn't want your politeness. It wanted your presence. It wanted you to lean in, elbows on the table, sauce on your shirt, laughter in your mouth. That night I walked the city one last time. No camera, no destination, just movement. A back alley ramen stand, a jazz bar hidden behind a laundry shop, a stranger who handed me a warm can of coffee from a vending machine because I looked cold. I realized Osaka wasn't trying to be loved. It was just being itself. And in doing so, it gave me something rare: permission to be messy, to be loud, to feel fully. When I boarded the train out the next morning, my stomach was full, my eyes heavy, my heart louder than it had been in years. Osaka had not asked me to be better. It had reminded me I already was enough. From fire to frost, from shrines to neon, we've seen Japan's heart from many angles. But now, it's time to climb once more, into mystery and legend, into a mountain village lost in time. Shall we continue to Shirakawa-go, where snow buries rooftops and the silence speaks in centuries? Shirakawa-go didn't feel real at first. It felt like I had slipped through a crack in the present and fallen into a place that time forgot to change. I arrived as evening settled in, and the snow was already falling heavy, thick flakes swirling in slow motion, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. The bus dropped me off at the edge of the village. The driver gave a short nod and drove off without a word. No taxis, no flashing signs, just cold air, wooden silence, and a few dim lanterns flickering like memories along the path. Then I saw them, the Gasho-zukuri houses, massive triangular roofs stretching toward the heavens like praying hands. Thatched thick to survive the brutal winters, they looked like they had been folded from paper by some ancient origami god. Snow rested heavy on top, undisturbed. Smoke curled from chimneys. Not smoke of survival, but of stillness, of supper, of home. I dragged my suitcase through the powder, its wheels useless, but I didn't care. Every step into that village felt like sinking deeper into something sacred. I reached my inn, a centuries-old farmhouse turned guest house. The hostess, an old woman in layers of wool, met me at the door with a smile so warm it made the snow around her seem apologetic. She handed me slippers, offered green tea, and spoke in soft Japanese, her voice rising and falling like a lullaby. Inside, there was no heater, just a wood fire in the center of the room, glowing red beneath a kettle. The scent of pine and smoke filled the house. Tatami mats lined the floor, and hand-drawn calligraphy hung crooked on the walls. I sat by the fire as she served miso soup and grilled trout, the kind that's caught just before sunset and kissed with salt. We didn't share language. We shared silence. And somehow, that was more honest than words. Later that night, I wandered outside. The village was asleep. Every house glowed faintly from within, like fireflies had taken up residence behind paper walls. Snow crunched beneath my boots. A small river ran quietly through the middle of the town, steam rising from its warmth, fogging the wooden bridge above it. And then, no sound. None. Not silence like I'd known before. This was deeper, older. The kind of silence that doesn't lack noise, but holds space. A silence that listens. I stood there for a long time, snow settling on my coat, watching the mountains loom like sleeping giants around us. I remember thinking, if peace had a form, it would look like this. At dawn, I climbed the hill that overlooked the entire village. The view stopped my breath. Below me, Shirakawa-go looked like a dream. White rooftops nestled into the earth, smoke curling up like prayers, trees heavy with snow and centuries. It was a painting the world had forgotten to frame. I took a photo. Then I put the camera away. Some beauty doesn't want to be captured. It wants to be kept. I spent the rest of the day walking narrow paths, slipping into open houses that had been preserved for generations. In one, I found a loom, a pair of sandals left by the door, a calendar from 1948. Dust danced in the sunlight like it was telling a story. Later, I helped the hostess carry firewood. We didn't talk. We just moved, one log at a time, passing them hand to hand. When we were done, she poured sake, and we toasted without speaking. That's the thing about Shirakawa-go. It teaches you the weight of quiet things. A bowl of rice shared in silence. A blanket laid gently over your shoulders. A nod, a smile, a fire. By the time I left, I wasn't just warm, I was humbled. Because this village didn't ask me to take anything from it. It asked me to leave something behind. My hurry, my noise, my need to explain. It asked me to become part of its story, even just for a moment. And I did. There's one more wonder to go. One last step in this journey through Japan's heart and soul. Next, we'll head to Koya-san, the sacred mountain where monks wake before sunrise, where lanterns burn for centuries, and where the line between life and death disappears into the trees. Koya-san felt like stepping out of the world and into the soul of it. The journey alone was a pilgrimage. Train to train, then a cable car that creaked up through fog-thick forests, and finally, a silent bus ride weaving between cedar giants that stood like sentinels on either side of the road. As we climbed, everything modern peeled away. Traffic lights, convenience stores, the noise of life. What remained was stillness. And something deeper. A presence. Koya-san isn't just a mountain. It's a sacred realm. The birthplace of Shingon Buddhism, 1,000 years of prayer layered into the soil. They don't just practice devotion here, they live inside it. I arrived at the monastery before sunset. A real one. Not a hotel. No TVs, no meat, no shoes past the entryway. A robed monk greeted me with a bow deeper than I deserved, then led me through polished wooden halls that echoed only the sound of our socks. My room was bare. Tatami mats, sliding paper doors, a single scroll with black ink calligraphy, and a window looking into a garden where nothing moved but the shadows. It was perfect. They served me Shojin Ryori that evening. Buddhist monk cuisine. No animal, no garlic, no fire in flavor. Just peace. Each dish was its own meditation. Soft tofu, wild mountain vegetables, miso soup that tasted like memory, no words. Just food and silence and the faint chime of a bell in the distance. The monk bowed as he placed the final bowl and said in slow, careful English, "To eat is to be grateful. To chew is to listen." I didn't understand until I ate in silence and realized I could hear everything. The wind against the wood, the water dripping from a far-off bamboo pipe, the faintest murmur of prayer beyond the wall. That night, I slept on a futon rolled out by hand. I lay there listening to the breath of the mountain. Somewhere, a bell told the hour, but no part of me wanted to know which one. The next morning, I woke at 4:30 a.m. Not because I wanted to, but because that's when the monks began their day. I followed the faint scent of incense through the hallway to the main temple. There were no pews, no microphones, just floor cushions, thick silence, and a low hum that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The ceremony began without announcement. Two monks chanted sutras in a rhythm older than time. Their voices echoed through the hall, not loud but infinite. A fire ritual began. Wood fed into a small sacred flame, smoke curling upward like a bridge between realms. I didn't know the words, but I knew the feeling. It was reverence. Not for a god high above, but for something closer. Something inside us. After the ceremony, I wandered into Okunoin, a cemetery. But calling it that feels wrong. This was a forest of souls. 200,000 gravestones scattered beneath towering cedar trees, many over 600 years old. Some were small and unmarked. Others were vast monuments, built by emperors, monks, and humble families alike. But death didn't feel heavy here. It felt at peace. The path through the cemetery led to Kobo Daishi's mausoleum, the founder of Shingon Buddhism, believed by many to still be meditating in eternal rest, not dead, but deep in enlightenment. Lanterns lined the way, hundreds, thousands, all lit, all glowing softly in the mist. It was raining lightly, the drops hitting stone and leaf like the mountain was whispering. I walked slowly, past statues with red bibs, left by families who lost children, past moss-covered gravestones of warriors and poets, past trees older than countries. I didn't take photos. I couldn't. It would have been like trying to photograph a prayer. At the end of the path, I bowed before Kobo Daishi's resting place. Not out of habit, but because my soul told me to. I placed my hands together, closed my eyes, and whispered a thank you I couldn't explain. Because somehow, in that forest of the dead, I felt more alive than I ever had. When I left Koya-san the next day, the monks bowed to me again, not as a tourist, as someone who had come and seen, and left part of themselves behind. The train back down the mountain felt surreal. People around me checked their phones, laughed, slept, but I just stared out the window as the trees gave way to highways again. The world was still there, but I wasn't the same. Because Koya-san doesn't change the world around you, it changes the way you see it. And now, the journey ends. They say travel teaches you about the world, but Japan taught me about myself. From the ancient breath of Kyoto's shrines to the volcanic heartbeat of Hakone. From Osaka's wild, untamed laughter to Koya-san's reverent stillness. From snow-drowned silence in Shirakawa-go to Hiroshima's whisper of peace. I didn't just see 10 wonders of Japan. I felt them. I walked through time, through spirit, through culture, through a nation that never needed to shout to be heard. A nation that speaks softly, through gestures, through seasons, through details. Through 1,000 paper cranes folded by children. Through a bowl of miso soup served at sunrise. through footsteps on tatami mats older than your memory. Japan didn't give me answers. It gave me questions. And in those questions, I found clarity. What matters? What stays when everything else falls away? Where is home really found? Within walls or within stillness? This journey reminded me that beauty isn't always loud, that sacredness doesn't need ceremony, and that the greatest wonders don't live in postcards or travel brochures. They live in moments. The sound of temple bells echoing at dawn. The first sip of hot tea on a cold mountain morning. A stranger's smile that says, "You're welcome here," without saying a word. I left Japan with more than photos. I left with a quieter mind, a fuller heart, and a soul stitched gently with every place, every face, every wonder. And now, I offer it to you. If this journey stirred something in you, if you felt the silence of Shirakawa-go, if you tasted the fire of Osaka's street food, if you stood, if only in your mind, beneath the sacred trees of Koya-san, then this story is no longer just mine. It's yours too. So I invite you to subscribe to this channel for more immersive travel stories like this one. Share this video with someone who dreams of Japan or simply needs to feel something real. Comment below. Which wonder spoke to your soul the loudest? Let's turn this story into a community of wanderers, of dreamers, of people who still believe that the world holds quiet magic waiting to be seen. This was the 10 wonders of Japan, but the greatest wonder of all, that you're still listening, and that means the journey isn't over. Not yet. Let's travel another country together. Comment the country you would like us to visit.